The text message from my mother arrived at 9:47 p.m. on December 22nd, just as I was tucking my 8-year-old son, Jake, into bed. "This Christmas is only for Chloe's kids. Don't come." I stared at the glowing screen, feeling that familiar punch in my stomach. Jake looked up at me with those innocent brown eyes and asked why we couldn't see Grandma and Grandpa this year. I forced a smile and told him we'd have our own special Christmas. What my family didn't know was that exactly 2 weeks earlier, I had signed papers that made me $47 million richer. I closed Jake's bedroom door and walked to my small kitchen, pulling out a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a celebration I hadn't yet had. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my parents dismissed me as the family disappointment and my sister Chloe basked in her role as the golden child, I had just achieved something none of them thought possible. For the past 4 years, I had been building a cybersecurity company called Secure Shield from this very kitchen table. Every night after Jake fell asleep, I would code until 3 in the morning, surviving on instant coffee and determination. During the day, I worked as a freelance IT consultant, picking up whatever projects I could find to pay rent on our cramped apartment in Denver. My parents never understood what I was doing. When I tried to explain my business at family dinners, my father would change the subject to Chloe's latest teaching achievements or her husband Brad's promotion at the insurance company. My mother would smile politely and ask if I was dating anyone, as if finding a man was the only path to respectability. The rejection letters from investors piled up like autumn leaves. 43 different venture capital firms told me variations of the same thing. Young single mothers don't have what it takes to lead tech companies. They questioned my commitment, my expertise, my ability to balance motherhood with business demands. Some didn't even bother with polite rejections. I remember one particularly brutal meeting where a silver-haired investor looked at Jake's photo on my desk and said, "Cute kid. Must be hard being a working mom. Have you considered finding a nice corporate job with benefits instead of chasing pipe dreams?" I walked out of that conference room with my head held high, but I cried in the parking garage for 20 minutes. The breakthrough came 6 months ago when Technova Corporation approached me directly. They had been tracking Secure Shield's innovative approach to protecting small businesses from cyber attacks. Our software had quietly gained a reputation in the industry for being both affordable and incredibly effective. What started as me trying to solve my own freelance client security problems had evolved into something revolutionary. The acquisition process was intense. Teams of lawyers, accountants, and executives scrutinized every line of code, every financial record, every client contract. They interviewed me for hours, testing my technical knowledge and business acumen. Unlike those early investors, these people saw my single motherhood as evidence of my resourcefulness and determination, not a liability. When Technova's CEO, Margaret Chen, offered me $47 million for my company, I nearly fainted. She wanted me to stay on as Chief Technology Officer with a generous salary and equity package. For the first time in my adult life, financial security wasn't just a distant dream. I hadn't told anyone about the sale. I wanted to surprise my family at Christmas, maybe announce it over dinner while we watched Jake open presents from his grandparents. I had imagined my father's proud smile, my mother's excited tears, even Chloe's genuine happiness for my success. Instead, I was reading a text message that made it clear I wasn't welcome at their celebration. According to my mother, Christmas was reserved for Chloe's twin daughters, Emily and Grace. My son apparently didn't qualify for the same consideration. The pattern was nothing new. When Jake was born, my parents offered minimal support because I had chosen to raise him alone after his father abandoned us. When I struggled to pay for childcare, they suggested I move back home instead of pursuing my computer hobby. When I missed family gatherings because I was working to provide for my son, they accused me of having the wrong priorities. Chloe, meanwhile, could do no wrong. Her perfectly planned wedding, her suburban house with the white picket fence, her 2 beautiful daughters born within 11 months of each other. She taught 2nd grade at an elementary school in Boulder, and my parents treated her like she was changing the world one reading lesson at a time. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table where I had built my empire. The laptop that had made me a multi-millionaire sat closed next to Jake's homework folder. Looking around our modest apartment, I realized something profound. I had the power to create the Christmas I had always wanted for my son. Not the Christmas my parents decided we deserved, but the one we actually deserved. The idea hit me like lightning. If my family wanted to exclude us from their celebration, I would create something so spectacular that they would regret their decision for years to come. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about showing Jake what family really meant and what happened when people chose love over judgment, inclusion over exclusion. I opened my laptop and began researching luxury properties in Colorado. By midnight, I had found exactly what I was looking for. The estate listing took my breath away. Nestled in the mountains outside Vail, the $10 million property sprawled across 15 acres of pristine Colorado wilderness. The main lodge featured 8 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen that belonged in a 5-star restaurant, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased panoramic views of snow-capped peaks. At 6:30 a.m. on December 23rd, I called the listing agent. Miranda Walsh answered on the second ring, clearly surprised to hear from someone interested in making an immediate cash offer. When I explained that I wanted to close that same day and host Christmas dinner for 25 people in 48 hours, she probably thought I was insane. "Mrs. Coleman," she said carefully, "properties of this caliber typically require extensive inspections, appraisals, and financing arrangements. The closing process alone usually takes 30 to 45 days. "I'm paying cash," I replied. "Full asking price, no inspections needed. I need the keys by this afternoon." 6 hours and numerous frantic phone calls later, I was standing in the marble foyer of my new mountain estate, holding the deed to the most beautiful property I had ever seen. The previous owners, a tech executive and his wife, had been transferred to Singapore and needed to sell quickly. My timing couldn't have been more perfect. While the lawyers handled paperwork, I began assembling the team that would transform this empty lodge into a Christmas wonderland. My first call went to Patricia Bloom, a celebrity chef I had seen featured in Food and Wine magazine. Her Denver-based catering company specialized in creating intimate luxury experiences for high-profile clients. "Patricia, I know this is incredibly short notice," I said when she answered her phone, "but I need you to create the most amazing Christmas dinner for 25 people tomorrow evening. Money is no object." Patricia laughed, assuming I was joking. When I convinced her I was serious and agreed to pay triple her normal rate plus bonuses for her entire team, her tone shifted dramatically. Within an hour, she was at the estate with her sous chef Marcus and pastry specialist Isabella planning a menu that would rival anything served at the finest restaurants in Aspen. My next call went to Samuel Martinez, an event coordinator who had orchestrated weddings for Denver's social elite. Samuel's reputation for creating magical celebrations on impossible timelines was legendary among people who could afford his services. "Samuel, I need you to turn this lodge into the most spectacular Christmas celebration anyone has ever seen," I explained as we walked through the enormous great room with its cathedral ceilings and massive stone fireplace. "I'm talking about decorations, entertainment activities for children, the whole experience." Samuel's eyes lit up as he surveyed the space. Professional decorators like him lived for challenges like this. By noon, his team was stringing thousands of twinkling lights throughout the lodge, arranging towering Christmas trees in every room, and creating cozy conversation areas with luxurious furniture rented from Denver's premier event supply company. The final piece of my team was Angela Thompson, a floral designer whose arrangements graced the lobbies of 5-star hotels throughout Colorado. Angela specialized in creating natural, organic designs that complemented architectural spaces rather than overwhelming them. "I want this place to feel like Christmas morning in a fairy tale," I told her as we stood on the main deck looking out at the snow-covered forest. "But elegant and sophisticated, not gaudy or overdone." Angela nodded, already envisioning her creation. Her team arrived with truckloads of fresh greenery, white roses, silver branches, and holly arrangements that would transform the lodge into something out of a luxury magazine. While the professionals worked their magic, I began reaching out to the people I wanted to invite. This wasn't going to be a random gathering of strangers. I wanted to create a celebration for people who, like Jake and me, had been overlooked or excluded by families who claimed to love them. My first call went to my grandfather, Henry, my father's dad, who had been living at Mountain View Assisted Living for the past 3 years. At 84, Henry was still sharp as a tack, but my parents rarely visited him. They claimed their schedules were too busy, but I knew the truth. They found his stories repetitive and his mobility limitations inconvenient. "Grandpa Henry," I said when the nurse brought him to the phone, "how would you like to spend Christmas at a beautiful mountain lodge with your great-grandson, Jake?" The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we had been disconnected. Then I heard him clear his throat. "Marissa, honey, are you sure I don't want to impose on your family plans?" "Grandpa, you are my family. I'm sending a car to pick you up tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Pack your warmest clothes and be ready for the best Christmas we've ever had." My next call went to my cousin Derek, my father's nephew, who lived in Fort Collins. Derek was a talented artist who created stunning wildlife paintings, but he had been effectively banished from family gatherings 5 years ago when he introduced his boyfriend Michael at Thanksgiving dinner. My parents' discomfort with his sexuality had led to increasingly subtle exclusions until Derek stopped coming to events entirely. "Derek, it's Marissa," I said when he answered. "I know this is out of the blue, but I'm hosting Christmas dinner tomorrow and I would love for you and Michael to join us." Derek's voice was cautious. "Marissa, I appreciate the invitation, but if your parents are going to be there, I think I'll pass. I'm tired of dealing with their judgment." "My parents won't be there," I assured him. "This is my celebration, and everyone who comes will be there because they're genuinely wanted and appreciated." The relief in his voice was immediate. In that case, we would be honored to accept. I continued down my list, reaching out to relatives and friends who had been marginalized or forgotten. Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister, had been quietly ostracized since her divorce 3 years ago. My parents disapproved of divorced women, believing they reflected poorly on family values. Linda had spent the last 2 Christmases alone in her small apartment in Colorado Springs. Mrs. Robinson, Jake's second-grade teacher, was a widow whose own children lived on the East Coast. She had mentioned during parent conferences that the holidays were difficult for her since her husband passed away. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, the elderly couple who lived next door to our old apartment building, had no family in America and usually spent Christmas watching old movies and eating takeout Chinese food. With each phone call, I discovered more about the web of exclusion and loneliness that existed around us. People who had been deemed not worthy of inclusion in traditional family celebrations, not because they were bad people, but because they didn't fit narrow definitions of acceptability. As evening fell on December 23rd, my mountain lodge was transformed into something magical. Thousands of lights twinkled against the dark forest backdrop. The scent of fresh pine and cinnamon filled the air. Patricia's team was already preparing elements of tomorrow's feast, filling the kitchen with the most incredible aromas. Jake was ecstatic as we walked through our new home. He'd never seen anything so beautiful, and his excitement reminded me why I was doing this. Not to hurt my parents or prove a point to my sister, but to give my son the Christmas celebration he deserved. The real shock came at 8:15 p.m. when my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity won. "Marissa, thank goodness," she said without any greeting. "I need you to babysit Emily and Grace tomorrow evening. Chloe's regular sitter canceled at the last minute, and we have reservations at that new seafood place in Boulder. You know how hard it is to get a table there during the holidays." I held the phone away from my ear, staring at it in disbelief. After excluding us from Christmas, she was now asking me to provide free childcare so they could enjoy their celebration without the burden of actually supervising the children it was supposedly designed for. "I'm sorry, Mom," I replied calmly. "I have other plans tomorrow." "Other plans?" She sounded genuinely confused. "What other plans could you possibly have? You said you understood that this Christmas is for Chloe's family." "I'm hosting my own Christmas celebration. I said simply. "Oh, honey," she laughed condescendingly. "You don't need to go to all that trouble. Just order a pizza and let Jake watch movies. He won't know the difference." I hung up without responding. Looking around my magnificent new home with its professional decorations and world-class preparations underway, I realized my mother was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. The morning of December 24th dawned crystal clear with fresh snow dusting the mountain peaks surrounding my estate. I woke up in the master bedroom, which was larger than my entire Denver apartment, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Today was going to change everything. While Jake slept in the adjacent bedroom that was now officially his, I made coffee in the gourmet kitchen and reviewed my final guest list. 23 people had confirmed attendance each, representing a story of exclusion or loneliness that resonated with my own experience. My first stop was Mountain View Assisted Living to personally collect Grandpa Henry. When I arrived in my rented luxury SUV, he was waiting in the lobby wearing his best suit and holding a small wrapped package. His face lit up when he saw me, but I could tell he was nervous. "Marissa, I can't believe you're doing this," he said as I helped him into the vehicle. "I haven't been to a real Christmas celebration in 3 years. Your parents always say they'll visit after the holidays, but somehow they never find the time." As we drove toward Vail, Henry told me stories I had never heard before. How he had worked 3 jobs to put my father through college. How he had saved for years to buy the house where my father grew up. How he had been quietly giving my parents money for years to help with expenses, never expecting anything in return except occasional visits that became less and less frequent. "I used to think maybe I was becoming a burden," he admitted, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "Getting old is hard enough without feeling like your own family finds you inconvenient." "Grandpa Henry, you are not a burden," I said firmly. "You're one of the most important people in my life, and I'm sorry it took me so long to make sure you knew that." When we arrived at the estate, Henry's reaction was everything I had hoped for. He stood in the great room, taking in the soaring ceilings, the massive Christmas tree, and the incredible mountain views, and tears rolled down his cheeks. "This is the most beautiful place I've ever seen," he whispered. "And you did this for us." "I did this for family," I replied. "Real family." The rest of my guests began arriving at 4 o'clock. Derek and his partner Michael brought a stunning painting Derek had created of the Colorado Rockies in winter, which we immediately hung above the fireplace. Aunt Linda arrived with homemade cookies and a nervous smile, clearly amazed to be included in such an elegant celebration. Mrs. Robinson brought a children's book she had written about Christmas traditions around the world, which she planned to read to any children at the gathering. The Chens arrived with traditional Chinese New Year decorations, explaining that they wanted to contribute something special to represent their own cultural celebrations. David Martinez, a former colleague from my freelance days, came with his teenage daughter, Sarah. David had been going through a difficult divorce, and Sarah was spending Christmas with him for the first time. Both father and daughter seemed overwhelmed by the warmth of the gathering. Each arrival brought its own story of gratitude. People who had expected to spend Christmas alone or dealing with family drama instead found themselves in a place where they were genuinely wanted and appreciated. Patricia's team had outdone themselves with the meal preparation. The dining room table, which could seat 24 people, was set with china and crystal that belonged to the estate's previous owners. The menu included traditional Christmas favorites alongside sophisticated touches that elevated each dish to restaurant quality. But the most magical part of the evening was watching Jake experience what a loving family celebration could be. He helped Grandpa Henry arrange his medications in the guest room where he would be staying. He showed Sarah the game room with its pool table and vintage arcade games. He listened intently as Mrs. Robinson read stories to the younger children who had come with some of the guests. At 8 o'clock, just as we were finishing dinner, my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed my mother's number, but I declined the call. 2 minutes later, she called again, then my father, then Chloe. "Aren't you going to answer that?" asked Aunt Linda, who had noticed the repeated calls. "Not tonight," I replied. "Tonight is about us." But the calls kept coming. Finally, Derek suggested I put my phone on silent and focus on our celebration. We moved to the great room where Angela's team had created a cozy conversation area around the massive fireplace. The children played board games while the adults shared stories and got to know each other. Around 10 o'clock, my phone lit up with a text message from my sister. "Where are you? Mom and Dad drove to your apartment, but some stranger answered the door. They're freaking out." I showed the message to Grandpa Henry, who chuckled. "I wonder how long it'll take them to figure out you've moved on without them." The answer came an hour later when my phone started buzzing with notifications from social media. Aunt Linda had posted photos of our gathering on Facebook, tagging family members and including captions about how wonderful it felt to be included in a real family celebration again. Derek had shared pictures of his painting hanging above our fireplace, writing about how meaningful it was to have his art appreciated by people who loved him for who he was. Mrs. Robinson had posted a photo of herself reading to the children, mentioning how grateful she was to spend Christmas with people who made her feel like family. But the post that really got attention came from Grandpa Henry. With help from Jake, he had uploaded a photo of himself sitting by our Christmas tree, smiling wider than I had seen him smile in years. His caption read, "After 3 years in assisted living, wondering if my family had forgotten about me. My granddaughter, Marissa, reminded me what Christmas is really about. Tonight, I'm surrounded by people who see me as a blessing, not a burden. This is what love looks like." Within minutes, his post had dozens of likes and comments from old friends, distant relatives, and people from his assisted living facility. But more importantly, it had been seen by my parents and sister, who were now frantically calling everyone in our extended family, trying to figure out where I was and how I had apparently become wealthy enough to host such an elaborate celebration. The evening concluded with gift exchanges that brought more tears of joy. I had spent the previous day shopping for thoughtful presents for each guest, choosing items that showed I had paid attention to their interests and needs. Grandpa Henry received a tablet loaded with digital photo albums of family memories and video calling software so he could stay connected with everyone. Derek got professional art supplies he had mentioned wanting but couldn't afford. Aunt Linda received a beautiful necklace and a spa day certificate for some well-deserved self-care. Jake was overwhelmed by the generosity of our guests who had all brought gifts for him, despite having just learned about the gathering. But his favorite present was watching his mother finally be surrounded by people who appreciated her. As the evening wound down, several guests asked if they could extend their stay. The estate had plenty of room, and I loved the idea of waking up Christmas morning with a house full of people who chose to be there. While everyone settled in for the night, I stepped onto the main deck to get some fresh air and process the incredible day we had shared. The mountain silence was broken only by the sound of laughter drifting from inside the lodge, where Jake was teaching Sarah and the other children how to play his favorite video game. My phone buzzed with another call from my mother. This time, I answered. "Marissa, what is going on?" she demanded without any greeting. "People are posting pictures of some fancy Christmas party, and Dad says someone else is living in your apartment. Where are you?" "I'm at home," I replied calmly. "What home? You live in that tiny apartment in Denver." "Not anymore," I said. "I bought a house in the mountains. We're having our own Christmas celebration." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought she had hung up. Finally, she spoke again, her voice tight with anger and confusion. "How could you afford a house? And who are all these people? I see pictures of your grandfather and your cousin Derek. You know Derek isn't welcome at family functions." "They're welcome at mine," I replied. "Everyone here is welcome in my home because I choose to surround myself and my son with people who actually want to be part of our lives." I could hear my father's voice in the background demanding to know what was happening. My mother put me on speakerphone. "Marissa, this is ridiculous," my father said. "You're acting like a child. Come home right now and stop this nonsense." "I am home, Dad, and for the first time in years, it actually feels like Christmas." I hung up and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring more confrontations, more demands for explanations, more attempts to control a situation that was no longer under their influence. But tonight, surrounded by the people who truly mattered, I was exactly where I belonged. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of pristine mountain beauty that makes Colorado famous. I woke to the sound of children's laughter echoing through the lodge and the aroma of Patricia's team preparing a breakfast that would rival any five-star resort. The great room had been transformed overnight into a winter wonderland of gift wrapping and excited voices. Jake was already up playing with Grandpa Henry and showing him how to use the tablet I had given him the night before. Derek and Michael were helping Mrs. Robinson set up a reading corner where she planned to continue the story sessions that had been such a hit. David and his daughter Sarah were teaching the Chens how to play pool, creating an intergenerational friendship that probably never would have happened in any other setting. Aunt Linda was helping Patricia's team serve breakfast, looking happier and more relaxed than I had seen her since her divorce. The morning unfolded like the Christmas mornings I had always dreamed about for Jake. Children played together while adults enjoyed meaningful conversations. There was no tension, no judgment, no walking on eggshells to avoid offending someone's sensibilities. Around 10 a.m., I received a text message from my mother. Chloe and Brad are both sick with food poisoning from that restaurant. Emily and Grace are fine, but we need help watching them today. Can you come over? I showed the message to Grandpa Henry, who shook his head in amazement. Even when they're desperate, they still can't bring themselves to apologize or explain why you weren't invited in the first place. I replied simply, "Sorry, I'm busy today. Hope everyone feels better soon." The response came immediately. "Busy with what? You don't have family obligations today." I didn't bother responding. Instead, I focused on the family obligations I had chosen to honor, making sure Grandpa Henry felt loved, giving Jake the Christmas celebration he deserved, and creating space for people who had been marginalized by narrow definitions of family acceptability. The morning gift exchange was everything I had hoped it would be. Each present had been chosen with care and attention to what would bring genuine joy to the recipient. When Jake opened his gifts, he was overwhelmed not by their expense, but by the thoughtfulness behind each choice. Mrs. Robinson had given him a journal where he could write his own stories, encouraging his love of creative writing. Derek and Michael had brought art supplies and offered to teach him painting techniques. The Chens had prepared traditional Chinese puzzles that challenged his problem-solving skills while teaching him about their culture. But the most meaningful moment came when Grandpa Henry presented Jake with a hand-carved wooden train that my great-grandfather had made for my father when he was Jake's age. Henry had kept it in storage for decades, waiting for the right moment to pass it on to the next generation. "This train has been in our family for 60 years, Henry explained as Jake ran his fingers over the smooth wooden cars. "Your great-great-grandfather made it with his own hands because he didn't have money for store-bought toys. He wanted his son to know that love and effort matter more than expensive things." Jake hugged his great-grandfather so tightly that both of them had tears in their eyes. It was a moment of connection across generations that my parents had made impossible through their neglect of Henry's place in our family. Around noon, Patricia announced that Christmas dinner would be served at 4 o'clock, giving everyone time to enjoy the mountain activities I had arranged. A local outfitter had brought snowshoes and cross-country skis for anyone who wanted to explore the property. The lodge's game room provided entertainment for those who preferred to stay warm inside. I was helping Jake learn to snowshoe when my phone started ringing insistently. The calls were coming from numbers I didn't recognize, so I finally answered one. "Marissa, this is Brad." My brother-in-law said, his voice strained and urgent. "Listen, I know there's been some kind of family drama, but Chloe and I are both really sick, and your parents can't handle Emily and Grace by themselves. The girls keep asking to visit their great-grandfather because they saw his Facebook post. Can you please just come help us out today?" "Brad, I'm sorry you're sick, but I can't help today," I replied. "I'm hosting Christmas dinner for 25 people at my new house." "Your new house?" Brad sounded confused. "What new house, and who are these 25 people?" "Family and friends who want to spend Christmas together," I said simply. "But Marissa, we are your family." Chloe is really upset about this whole situation. She doesn't understand why you're being so dramatic. I took a deep breath, looking around at Jake playing in the snow with children who had welcomed him immediately at Grandpa Henry, sitting on the deck, enjoying the mountain sunshine he rarely got to experience in his assisted living facility, at Derek and Michael, building a snowman with artistic flair that was making everyone laugh. "Brad, this is my family," I said. "These are people who choose to love and support each other without conditions or exclusions. I'm sorry you're having a difficult day, but I'm having the best Christmas of my life." The calls continued throughout the afternoon, but I stopped answering them. Instead, I focused on the incredible celebration we had created. The Christmas dinner that Patricia's team served was nothing short of spectacular. 7 courses of perfectly prepared food, from butternut squash soup to prime rib to desserts that looked like works of art. But more important than the food was the conversation. Stories were shared, connections were made, and everyone felt heard and valued. Mrs. Robinson told us about her late husband's Christmas traditions. Derek described the art projects he was planning for the new year. David talked about his hopes for rebuilding his relationship with his daughter after the divorce. Grandpa Henry became the evening's entertainment, sharing stories from his childhood in rural Colorado and his experiences serving in the military. Jake listened with rapt attention, learning about family history that my parents had never bothered to share with him. At 8 o'clock, as we were enjoying Patricia's incredible chocolate tart, my phone exploded with notifications. Someone had been posting real-time updates of our celebration on social media, and the posts were being shared throughout our extended family network. Aunt Linda had shared a photo of herself laughing with people who appreciated her sense of humor, writing, "3 years after my divorce, I finally found a Christmas celebration where being single doesn't make me a social pariah. Thank you, Marissa, for reminding me that family should be about love, not judgment." Derek had posted a time-lapse video of himself and Michael creating snow sculptures with the children captioning it. 5 years after being excluded from family gatherings for being gay, I'm spending Christmas with people who celebrate love in all its forms. This is what acceptance looks like. But the post that really caught fire was from Mrs. Robinson. She had shared a photo of herself reading to a group of children and adults, all gathered around the fireplace in our great room. Her caption read, "As a widow facing her 3rd Christmas alone, I thought the holidays would always be sad for me. Tonight, a former student's mother invited me into her family celebration, and I'm reminded that family is created by choice, not just by blood. This is the most beautiful Christmas I've had since my husband passed away." The post had been shared hundreds of times with comments from teachers, widows, and other people who felt isolated during the holidays. It was becoming a viral story about the importance of inclusive celebration and chosen family. But the social media attention also meant that my parents and sister now had a front row seat to exactly what they had missed. The photos and videos made it clear that this wasn't some modest gathering in a rented community center. This was an elaborate, expensive celebration in a stunning mountain estate, hosted by someone who obviously had resources they knew nothing about. My phone started ringing again, this time with a call from my father. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Marissa, I need you to explain what's going on right now," he demanded. "How did you afford this house? Where did you get money for all this? Are you in some kind of trouble?" "I'm not in trouble, Dad. I'm successful. The company I built was acquired 2 weeks ago for $47 million. The silence that followed was deafening. I could imagine my parents processing this information, realizing that while they were dismissing my computer hobby, I had been building something extraordinary. $47 million, my father finally repeated. "You're telling me you're a millionaire." "I'm telling you that I've achieved something significant, and instead of being able to share that accomplishment with my family, I found out that my son and I aren't welcome at your Christmas celebration." "Marissa, you know that's not what your mother meant," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Dad, it's exactly what she meant, and that's fine. I've created my own celebration with people who actually want us here. I hung up and rejoined our dinner conversation, but I could see that the evening's peace was about to be shattered. Sure enough, at 9:15 p.m., we heard cars pulling up the mountain road to our lodge. Through the massive windows of the great room, I could see headlights approaching. Multiple vehicles were making their way up the winding driveway that led to our estate. I didn't need to guess who was coming. My parents had decided to show up uninvited, probably bringing Chloe and Brad despite their food poisoning, determined to insert themselves into a celebration they had explicitly excluded us from. Grandpa Henry must have noticed my expression because he reached over and squeezed my hand. "Remember, honey," he said quietly, "they can't take this away from you. You created something beautiful here, and that belongs to you and Jake now." I nodded, feeling grateful for his wisdom and support. Whatever was about to happen, I was no longer the powerless single mother who accepted exclusion and judgment. I was standing in my own home, surrounded by people who loved me with the financial independence to make my own choices. The confrontation I had been avoiding all day was finally coming to my doorstep. The convoy of vehicles that pulled up to my estate included my parents' Mercedes Chloe and Brad's SUV, and two other cars I didn't immediately recognize. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched as 7 adults and 2 children emerged from the vehicles, all bundling up against the cold mountain air as they took in the stunning lodge that was now my home. I could see my mother's face even from a distance, her expression cycling through confusion, amazement, and what looked like genuine shock as she processed the scale and elegance of the property. My father stood beside her, hands on his hips, in the posture I remembered from childhood lectures about responsibility and proper behavior. Chloe and Brad looked pale, clearly still recovering from their food poisoning, but apparently determined not to miss this confrontation. The other 2 cars had brought Chloe's in-laws and my Uncle Tom, my mother's brother, who had obviously been recruited as backup for whatever intervention my parents had planned. "Should I ask them to leave?" Derek asked quietly, moving to stand beside me at the window. "Michael and I can handle this if you want us to." I appreciated the support, but I knew this conversation needed to happen. My guests had given me something invaluable, the confidence that comes from being surrounded by people who value and respect you. I was no longer facing my family's judgment alone. "No, it's okay," I replied. "Let's see what they have to say." I opened the front door before they could ring the bell, not wanting to disrupt the peaceful evening our guests were enjoying. The shock on my parents' faces when they saw me standing in the doorway of what was clearly a multi-million-dollar estate was almost comical. "Marissa," my mother began, but she seemed to have lost her usual commanding tone. "We need to talk." "Of course," I replied calmly, "but I should let you know that I have guests, so we'll need to keep this brief and civil." We gathered in the formal living room, a space I had barely used because our celebration had centered around the great room with its massive fireplace. Even this smaller space was elegantly furnished and offered stunning views of the snow-covered mountains. My father was the first to speak, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he had used throughout my childhood. "Marissa, I think you owe us an explanation. How exactly did you acquire this property, and why didn't you tell us about your financial situation?" "I acquired this property by purchasing it with money I earned from selling my company," I replied. "And I didn't tell you about my financial situation because you've never shown any interest in my professional accomplishments." "That's not true," my mother protested. "We've always been supportive of your career." Chloe, despite her pale complexion, couldn't resist joining the attack. "Marissa, this whole thing is just showing off. You're trying to make us feel bad because we planned a quiet family Christmas." "You didn't plan a quiet family Christmas," I corrected. "You planned a Christmas that specifically excluded me and my son. There's a difference." "The girls needed a peaceful holiday," Brad added, speaking up for the first time. "Emily and Grace have been overstimulated lately, and we thought a smaller gathering would be better for them." "Brad, you literally told me this Christmas was only for Chloe's kids. Not that it was going to be small and quiet, but that Jake wasn't welcome because he wasn't one of Chloe's children." Uncle Tom, who had been silent until now, tried to play peacekeeper. Look, clearly there's been some miscommunication here. The important thing is that we're all family and we can work this out. Actually, Tom, I'm not sure we are all family anymore, I said, feeling a strength in my voice that surprised even me. Family doesn't exclude children from Christmas celebrations because they don't fit a specific mold. Family doesn't put elderly relatives in assisted living and then forget they exist. Family doesn't ostracize people because they're divorced or gay or don't conform to narrow expectations. What are you talking about? My father demanded. I'm talking about Grandpa Henry, who you visited exactly twice in 3 years. I'm talking about Derek, who hasn't been invited to a family gathering in 5 years because you're uncomfortable with his sexuality. I'm talking about Aunt Linda, who you've systematically excluded since her divorce because you think it reflects poorly on family values. My mother's face flushed red. Those situations are completely different. We have limited space for gatherings, and we have to make practical decisions about who to include. Limited space. I gestured around the elegant room where we were sitting. Mom, you have a 6-bedroom house and a dining room that seats 12 people. You don't exclude people because of space limitations. You exclude them because you've decided they don't meet your standards. Before anyone could respond, we heard laughter from the great room where our guests were still enjoying their Christmas celebration. The sound seemed to emphasize the contrast between the joy we had created and the tension of this confrontation. Who are all these people anyway? Chloe asked. I saw the social media posts, but I don't recognize half of them. They're family and friends who wanted to spend Christmas with people who appreciate them, I replied. Mrs. Robinson is Jake's teacher. The Chens are our former neighbors. David is a colleague going through a divorce. There are others who had nowhere else to go or who had been excluded from other celebrations. So you're running some kind of charity Christmas for strays? My father asked with unmistakable disdain. The comment hit me like a physical blow, but before I could respond, another voice entered the conversation. Actually, we're people who recognize love and generosity when we see it. I turned to see Grandpa Henry standing in the doorway, leaning on his walking cane, but carrying himself with dignity. Behind him stood Derek and Aunt Linda, clearly having come to offer support. Dad, my father, said, his voice immediately shifting to the tone people use when they've been caught doing something embarrassing. I didn't know you were here. Of course you didn't know I was here, Henry replied, his voice stronger than I had heard it in years. You haven't known where I was or what I was doing for months at a time. But your daughter knows. She picked me up yesterday and brought me into her home because she understands what family actually means. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of our celebration continuing in the other part of the lodge. My parents and sister looked genuinely stunned, as if they had never considered how their behavior appeared from the perspective of the people they had excluded. And Derek. Henry continued, turning to acknowledge my cousin, has been creating beautiful art and building a life with someone who makes him happy, while you've been treating him like he doesn't exist because you're too narrow-minded to accept love that doesn't look exactly like yours. Derek stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. I stopped trying to explain myself to you years ago. Tonight, I'm surrounded by people who don't need me to justify who I am or who I love. It's the first time in years that I've felt like I belonged at a family gathering. Aunt Linda, who had always been the quietest person in family disputes, surprised everyone by speaking up. Marissa created something tonight that I had forgotten was possible. A celebration where people are included because they're valued, not excluded because they don't fit someone's narrow vision of acceptability. My mother looked around the room, clearly struggling to maintain her position in the face of this unified response. We never meant to hurt anyone's feelings, she said weakly. But you did hurt people's feelings, I replied. And more than that, you taught Jake that love comes with conditions, that family acceptance has to be earned by conforming to other people's expectations. As if summoned by his name, Jake appeared in the doorway, curious about the voices he had heard from the formal living room. He looked around at the assembled adults, clearly sensing tension, but not understanding its source. "Mom, is everything okay?" he asked, moving to stand beside me. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I assured him. These are Grandma and Grandpa Coleman and your Aunt Chloe. They came to visit." Jake looked at my parents with the polite confusion of a child meeting adults he had been told were important, but who felt like strangers. "Are you staying for our Christmas party? Mrs. Robinson is going to read another story after dessert." My parents exchanged glances, clearly struggling with how to respond to their grandson's innocent invitation. Emily and Grace Chloe's twin daughters had been quiet throughout this entire exchange. But now Grace spoke up. "Mom, can we see the Christmas party? It sounds fun." The question hung in the air like a challenge. My parents were faced with a choice: acknowledge that they had excluded Jake from a celebration that their other grandchildren were now eager to join, or continue to maintain that their decisions had been appropriate and justified. "Girls, we can't stay," Chloe said quickly. "We're still not feeling well and we need to get home." "But Great-Grandpa Henry is here," Emily said, having spotted him across the room. "We haven't seen him in forever." The comment landed like a bomb in the middle of our tense conversation. My parents' faces went white as they realized their own grandchildren were inadvertently exposing the pattern of exclusion and neglect that had defined their family relationships. "We'll visit Great-Grandpa Henry soon," my father said hastily. "Right now we need to go home." Henry walked over to the twins, moving slowly but purposefully. "Emily, Grace, it's wonderful to see you both. You've grown so much since the last time I saw you." "Great-Grandpa Henry, why don't you come to our house anymore?" Grace asked with the directness that only children can manage. Henry looked at my parents, his expression sad but not accusatory. "Well, sweetheart, sometimes adults get busy with their own lives and forget to make time for the people who love them." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as everyone processed the implications of this exchange. My parents were being confronted with the reality of their choices through the innocent questions of their own grandchildren. "We should go," my mother said abruptly, clearly eager to escape a conversation that was no longer going in their favor. But before they could leave, Jake did something that surprised everyone in the room. He walked over to his grandparents and looked up at them with complete sincerity. "You can come to our Christmas party if you want," he said. "There's lots of food and everyone is really nice. Maybe next year you could plan Christmas here instead of somewhere else." The generosity of his invitation, offered without resentment or conditions despite having been excluded from their celebration, seemed to affect everyone in the room. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father looked genuinely ashamed for the first time in the conversation. "That's very kind of you, Jake," my mother said softly. "Maybe we'll take you up on that invitation sometime." As my parents and sister prepared to leave, I felt a sense of closure rather than victory. This confrontation hadn't been about proving them wrong or making them feel bad. It had been about establishing boundaries and making it clear that exclusion and judgment would no longer be tolerated in my relationships. "Marissa," my father said as they reached the front door, "we need to talk more about this. This conversation isn't over." "You're right," I agreed. "It's not over, but the next conversation happens on my terms when I'm ready to have it, and with the understanding that my son and I will be treated with respect and inclusion, not tolerated as inconveniences." As their cars disappeared down the mountain road, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. The people who truly mattered were still here, still celebrating, still creating the kind of family bond I had always wanted for Jake. Walking back to the great room, I was greeted by warm smiles and gentle questions about whether everything was all right. These people had heard the raised voices and tension, but they had given me space to handle the situation while making it clear that their support was available if needed. "How do you feel?" Derek asked as I settled back into our cozy conversation area around the fireplace. "Free." I replied, surprising myself with the honesty of the answer. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free. The week between Christmas and New Year's Day brought a series of developments I hadn't anticipated. The social media posts from our Christmas celebration had continued to spread, creating a viral story about family exclusion, chosen family, and the power of inclusive celebration. Local news stations in Denver had picked up the story, framing it as a heartwarming tale about a successful businesswoman giving back to her community during the holidays. But more importantly, the posts had sparked conversations within our extended family network that had been long overdue. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years were reaching out, sharing their own stories of feeling excluded or marginalized by family dynamics they had never questioned before. My cousin Janet, who lived in California, called to tell me about her own experiences with our family's judgment after her teenage daughter became pregnant. My Uncle Mark shared stories about feeling ostracized for struggling with alcoholism, even after years of sobriety. Each conversation revealed another layer of the exclusion pattern my parents had maintained for decades. On December 30th, I received an unexpected call from Chloe. Her voice was subdued, lacking the defensive edge that had characterized our recent interactions. "Marissa, can we talk?" she asked. "Just the two of us without Mom and Dad around." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Vail-neutral territory that wouldn't put either of us at a disadvantage. When Chloe arrived, she looked tired and somehow smaller than usual, as if the week since our confrontation had forced her to examine things she preferred to avoid. "I need to apologize," she said without preamble, sitting across from me at a small table near the window. "Not just for the Christmas thing, but for years of letting our parents treat you the way they have." I was genuinely surprised by her directness. Chloe had always been conflict-averse, preferring to maintain family harmony even when it meant overlooking unfairness or cruelty. "I think I've always known they favored me," she continued. "But I told myself it was because I made choices they understood, not because they loved me more or valued me more highly." This week, watching Emily and Grace ask questions about why they never see great-grandpa Henry or why they don't know their cousin Derek has forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths. She took a sip of her coffee, clearly gathering courage for what came next. "Brad and I have been talking about the kind of family environment we want to create for our daughters. We don't want them growing up thinking love has to be earned through conformity, or that family acceptance comes with conditions." "What does that mean, practically?" I asked, curious about where this conversation was heading. "It means we want to build relationships with the people Mom and Dad have excluded. Emily and Grace loved meeting great-grandpa Henry even for those few minutes. They've been asking about him constantly since Christmas night, and they're curious about Derek's art and whether he would teach them to paint." I felt a flutter of hope, but also caution. Chloe had disappointed me before by backing down from stands she had initially taken against our parents' behavior. "Chloe, I appreciate what you're saying," I replied carefully, "but I need to know that this isn't just temporary guilt. If you want to build relationships with the family members our parents have rejected, you need to be prepared for their disapproval and manipulation." "I know," she said firmly, "and I'm ready for that. Brad and I have already decided to invite Grandpa Henry to stay with us for a few days next week. Emily and Grace want to hear stories about our family history, and they want him to see their school projects and meet their friends." This was more progress than I had expected from one conversation, but I knew the real test would come when our parents discovered Chloe was actively rebuilding relationships they had worked to sever. That test came sooner than expected. On New Year's Eve, as I was preparing for a quiet evening at the lodge with Jake and the guests who had chosen to extend their stay, my phone rang with a call from my mother. "Marissa, I need you to talk some sense into your sister," she said without greeting. "She's picked up your grandfather from his facility and brought him to her house without discussing it with us first. He's too old to be traveling around like this, and she's being irresponsible." Grandpa Henry is 84, not 94. He's mentally sharp and physically capable. If Chloe wants to spend time with him, that's between them and him. "It's not that simple," my mother continued. "Your father and I are responsible for his care decisions. We can't have family members making unilateral choices about his living situation." "What you mean is that you're uncomfortable with anyone challenging the isolation you've imposed on him," I replied. Grandpa Henry is thriving here at the lodge, and from what Chloe tells me, he's equally happy spending time with his great-granddaughters. The conversation continued in this vein for 20 minutes, with my mother cycling through guilt, anger, and attempted manipulation to regain control over a situation that was slipping away from her. But I had experienced something transformative during our Christmas celebration, the confidence that comes from being surrounded by people who support your choices, rather than questioning your judgment at every turn. "Mom, I'm going to be direct with you," I said when she paused for breath. "The family dynamics you and Dad have maintained for years are changing. People are choosing connection over control, inclusion over exclusion. You can adapt to these changes and rebuild relationships based on mutual respect, or you can continue to demand compliance with rules that no longer serve anyone. But you can't prevent other adults from making their own choices about who they want in their lives." 3 days later, the situation escalated when Derek called to tell me that our parents had shown up at his art studio in Fort Collins, demanding he stop manipulating family members with social media posts and inappropriate relationship building. They actually used the word inappropriate, Derek told me, clearly shaken by the encounter. They said my relationship with Michael was confusing the children and that I needed to respect family boundaries. What did you tell them? I told them that the only inappropriate thing happening was their attempt to control adult relationships through emotional manipulation. Michael was there, and he was incredibly calm and dignified in the face of their hostility. He asked them directly what they found threatening about love and commitment between two people who care about each other. The confrontation had ended with our parents storming out of Derek's studio, but not before making threats about protecting the family from people who didn't respect traditional values. That evening, I received similar calls from Aunt Linda and several of our extended family members. Our parents were conducting a systematic campaign to regain control over relationships they felt were slipping away from their influence. The campaign reached its peak on January 3rd when my parents orchestrated what could only be described as an intervention. They had convinced Uncle Tom and his wife, along with Brad's parents and 2 other couples from their social circle, to gather at Chloe's house for a family meeting designed to address what my mother was calling Marissa's divisive behavior. Chloe called me in tears, explaining that she had been ambushed by 8 adults who spent 2 hours telling her that she was being manipulated by my sudden wealth and needed to distance herself from the negative influences I was introducing into the family. "They made it sound like you were some kind of cult leader," Chloe sobbed into the phone. "They said you were using money to buy loyalty from family members who felt rejected, and that you were teaching Emily and Grace to disrespect their elders by questioning family traditions." "What did you tell them?" "I told them that you had shown me what family support actually looks like, and that I wasn't going to apologize for wanting my daughters to experience unconditional love instead of conditional acceptance." The intervention had backfired spectacularly. Instead of convincing Chloe to fall back in line, it had revealed the extent to which our parents were willing to go to maintain control over family relationships. Brad had been particularly disturbed by the way the group had dismissed his concerns about creating a healthier environment for his daughters. "Brad stood up for me," Chloe continued. "He told everyone in that room that he had watched you create the most loving, inclusive celebration he had ever witnessed, and that he wanted our family to learn from your example rather than tear it down." The family meeting had concluded with ultimatums family members needed to choose between loyalty to my parents' vision of appropriate family structure or acceptance of what they called Marissa's experiment in buying affection. But ultimatums only work when people are afraid of the consequences of choosing wrong. None of us were afraid anymore. Over the following week, the family dynamics shifted dramatically. Grandpa Henry made the decision to move permanently into the guest house at my estate, where he could maintain his independence while having access to the medical support he needed and the family connections he craved. Derek and Michael began hosting monthly art workshops at the lodge, teaching techniques to anyone interested, while building genuine friendships with Jake and the other children in our chosen family network. Aunt Linda started bringing her book club to meet in our library, creating intellectual stimulation. She'd been missing since her divorce. Most significantly, Chloe and Brad made the decision to host their own inclusive family gathering for Valentine's Day, inviting everyone my parents had systematically excluded and making it clear that their home would be a space of acceptance rather than judgment. When my parents learned about Chloe's party planning, they made one final attempt to reassert control. My father called to inform me that they were cutting ties with family members who couldn't respect boundaries and that they expected me to return to normal relationships within 30 days or face permanent estrangement. Dad, I replied calmly, I think you misunderstand what's happening here. I'm not trying to destroy our family. I'm trying to save the parts of it that are worth saving by creating space for authentic relationship instead of performed compliance. This is not authentic relationship, he insisted. This is rebellion disguised as generosity. No, Dad, this is what love looks like when it's not conditioned on control. The conversation ended with my father hanging up on me, but I felt peace rather than anxiety. For the first time in my adult life, I was free from the exhausting work of trying to earn acceptance from people who were fundamentally unwilling to offer it. That evening, as Jake and I sat by the fireplace in our mountain home, surrounded by photos from our Christmas celebration and planning for future gatherings, I realized something profound. I had used my financial success to purchase more than a beautiful estate. I had bought freedom from family dysfunction and the space to create the relationships I actually wanted. The power dynamics in our family had shifted permanently, but not through force or manipulation. They had changed because people had been given alternatives to exclusion and judgment, and they had chosen connection instead. 3 months later, on a crisp April morning in the Colorado mountains, I stood on the deck of my estate watching Jake teach his cousins, Emily and Grace, how to identify different types of wildflowers that were beginning to bloom across our property. The sound of their laughter echoed across the valley, mixing with the voices of the adults who had gathered in what had become our traditional monthly family brunch. The transformation that had begun on Christmas night had evolved into something more substantial than I could have imagined. What started as a single celebration of inclusion had grown into a thriving community of chosen family built on principles of mutual respect and unconditional acceptance. Grandpa Henry had not only moved permanently into the guest house, but had become the heart of our extended family network. At 85, he was more vibrant and engaged than he had been in years, spending his days tending gardens, sharing stories with children and video calling distant relatives who had reconnected with him after seeing our social media posts. His transformation had been remarkable to witness. The isolation and depression that had characterized his final years in assisted living had been replaced by purpose and joy. He had become Jake's primary source of family history, teaching him woodworking skills and passing on traditions that might otherwise have been lost. Derek's art studio in the lodge's converted garage had become a gathering place for creative expression. Children and adults alike came for weekly workshops, but more importantly, they came for the non-judgmental environment where creativity was encouraged and differences were celebrated. His relationship with Michael had deepened in the supportive atmosphere we had created, and they were now planning their wedding for the following summer. Aunt Linda had blossomed in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. Free from the constant criticism and exclusion she had experienced since her divorce, she had started writing a novel, joined a hiking club, and begun dating a widowed gentleman she had met at one of our gatherings. Her confidence and joy were infectious, inspiring other divorced family members to believe that their lives could continue to grow and evolve. Mrs. Robinson had become an unofficial grandmother figure to all the children in our network, not just Jake. Her teaching skills and nurturing nature had created an informal education program where children learned about literature, history, and cultural traditions through storytelling and hands-on activities. The Chens had introduced us to Chinese cultural celebrations, expanding our understanding of family traditions beyond American customs. Their presence had enriched every gathering, bringing wisdom from their own experiences of creating family connections far from their country of origin. David and his daughter Sarah had found stability and healing within our community. Sarah was thriving in her new school near Vail, and David had started a consulting business helping other divorced parents navigate custody arrangements and co-parenting challenges. Their success had attracted other single parents who found support and practical assistance within our network. But perhaps the most significant change had occurred within Chloe's family. Brad and Chloe had embraced the principles of inclusive family building with enthusiasm that surprised even me. Their home in Boulder had become another gathering place where extended family members felt welcome and valued. Emily and Grace were growing up with a radically different understanding of family than their parents had experienced. They saw diversity as strength inclusion as normal and love as unlimited rather than conditional. Their questions about why some families excluded people had sparked important conversations about tolerance, acceptance, and the difference between tradition and prejudice. The monthly gatherings at both my estate and Chloe's home had attracted attention from local media and family therapy professionals. We had received requests from social workers, counselors, and researchers who wanted to study our model of chosen family building. Several universities had reached out about documenting our approach to healing family dysfunction through intentional community creation. My parents' response to these developments had evolved from anger to bewilderment to what appeared to be genuine reflection. The permanent estrangement they had threatened never materialized, but neither did any acknowledgement of the harm their exclusion patterns had caused. Instead, they had become increasingly isolated as more family members chose connection over control. Uncle Tom and his wife had begun attending our gatherings after witnessing the joy and stability we had created. Several of their longtime friends had asked pointed questions about why they never saw certain family members at gatherings, forcing uncomfortable conversations about exclusion and judgment. The turning point came in March when my mother was hospitalized for emergency surgery after a fall at home. Chloe called to inform me, and without hesitation, our entire network mobilized to provide support. Meals appeared at the hospital. Flowers filled her room, and family members she hadn't spoken to in years showed up to offer assistance. Grandpa Henry insisted on visiting his daughter-in-law despite their strained relationship, bringing flowers from our estate's garden and sitting with her during the long hours when my father needed to rest. Derek created a beautiful get-well card featuring pressed flowers from our mountain property. Aunt Linda coordinated a meal delivery schedule that continued for 3 weeks after my mother returned home. The outpouring of love and practical support from people my parents had rejected or ignored created a profound impact. For the first time, they experienced what unconditional family support actually looked like, contrasted against years of relationships built on conditions and expectations. My mother's recovery became a catalyst for honest conversation. During one of my visits to her home, she asked me directly about the community we had built and whether there might be space for people who were ready to change their approach to family relationships. I've been wrong about a lot of things, she admitted, her voice quiet and thoughtful. Watching everyone care for me during my recovery, especially people I hadn't treated well, has made me realize that I've been prioritizing control over love for most of my adult life. The conversation that followed was the most honest exchange we had shared in decades. She acknowledged the harm caused by exclusion patterns, the missed opportunities for relationship building, and the pain inflicted on family members who had been deemed unacceptable for various reasons. "I don't know how to fix what I've broken," she confessed, "but I want to learn how to be the kind of family member who adds to people's lives instead of subtracting from them." My father's transformation was slower and more reluctant, but equally significant. His military background and traditional worldview had made him resistant to examining the impact of his authoritative approach to family leadership. But seeing the genuine happiness and stability within our community contrasted with the increasing isolation he and my mother experienced had forced him to reconsider long-held beliefs about family structure and authority. The breakthrough came when Jake, with the confidence that had grown from being unconditionally accepted and valued, approached his grandfather directly about their relationship. During a family brunch in May, Jake asked my father why they had never spent time together and whether he would like to learn about the woodworking projects great-grandpa Henry had been teaching him. My father, faced with his grandson's direct question and genuine invitation, broke down in tears. The emotional wall he had maintained for decades crumbled as he realized how much connection he had sacrificed in his pursuit of control and conformity. "I've been so focused on being right that I forgot to focus on being loving," he told Jake, his voice shaking with emotion. "I would be honored to learn woodworking with you and great-grandpa Henry." The woodworking sessions that began that week became a bridge for rebuilding the relationship between my father and Grandpa Henry. Working with their hands while teaching Jake traditional skills created space for conversations about forgiveness, regret, and the possibility of new beginnings. By summer, both my parents had become regular attendees at our family gatherings, not as leaders or authorities, but as participants, learning how to contribute to community rather than control it. The adjustment wasn't always smooth, but their commitment to change was genuine, and the patience of our extended family network provided space for growth and healing. The business success that had made this transformation possible continued to flourish. My role as Chief Technology Officer at Technova allowed me to work remotely from the estate while contributing to cutting-edge cybersecurity innovations. The financial security that had initially enabled my Christmas gesture had evolved into sustainable independence that supported not just my family's needs, but our community's ongoing activities. I had used a portion of my wealth to establish a foundation focused on supporting family healing and chosen family building. The foundation provided grants to family therapists, community organizers, and social workers who were developing innovative approaches to addressing family dysfunction and isolation. Local schools had begun incorporating our model of inclusive celebration into their diversity and inclusion programming. Children throughout the Vale area were learning about different types of families, the importance of acceptance over tolerance, and the power of choosing love over judgment. On a warm September evening, as our extended family gathered for what had become our traditional harvest celebration, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. 12 months earlier, I had been a struggling single mother working from a tiny apartment while building a business that no one in my family understood or valued. The text message that had excluded Jake and me from Christmas had been devastating in the moment, but it had also been liberating. It had forced me to choose between accepting dysfunction and creating something better, between seeking approval and building authentic connection. Jake, now 9 years old and confident in ways I couldn't have imagined a year earlier, was helping serve dinner to our guests while chatting easily with adults and children who ranged in age from 4 to 85. He had learned that family is created through choice and sustained through love, not defined by blood or limited by tradition. Derek was putting finishing touches on a collaborative mural that depicted our family's story of transformation, created with contributions from every member of our community. The mural would be displayed at the local community center as part of an exhibit about innovative approaches to family building. Chloe and Brad were announcing their decision to adopt a child from the foster care system, inspired by their daughter's understanding that family is expanded through love rather than limited by circumstances. Emily and Grace had spent months preparing for their new sibling, creating art projects and writing stories about welcoming someone who needed a home. Grandpa Henry was leading a group of children in traditional folk songs, his voice strong and clear as he shared musical heritage that connected generations. At 86, he was proof that it's never too late to experience the joy of being genuinely wanted and valued by family. Mrs. Robinson was coordinating a storytelling circle where community members shared memories and traditions from their own cultural backgrounds, creating a rich tapestry of experiences that honored diversity while building unity. Aunt Linda was documenting our celebration through photography and writing, working on a book about chosen family that had attracted the attention of major publishers. Her story of transformation from isolation to community leadership was inspiring other divorced individuals to believe in the possibility of new beginnings. My parents sat together at a table with people they had once excluded, engaged in animated conversations about gardening travel, and the grandchildren they were finally getting to know as individuals rather than symbols of family success. Their transformation hadn't been complete or perfect, but it had been genuine and sustained. As the evening wound down and families began preparing for departure, Jake approached me with a question that had become our traditional end-of-gathering ritual. "Mom, what did you learn today?" I looked around at the faces of people who had become family through choice rather than obligation, who had created community through inclusion rather than exclusion, who had chosen love over control in countless small but significant ways. I learned that the best revenge against exclusion is inclusion, I replied, and that the most powerful response to conditional love is creating space for unconditional acceptance. Jake nodded seriously, then grinned. I learned that great-grandpa Henry knows all the words to songs nobody else remembers, and that Emily and Grace want to help me build a treehouse next spring. As our guests departed, making plans for next month's gathering and exchanging contact information for activities throughout the week, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something lasting and meaningful. The $10 million estate had been worth every penny, not because of its luxury or status, but because it had provided space for transformation that extended far beyond its physical boundaries. The Mountain Lodge had become a symbol of possibility, a place where people could experience family relationships built on respect rather than control inclusion, rather than exclusion love, rather than judgment. Standing on the deck in the cool mountain air, watching taillights disappear down the winding road, while Jake cleaned up inside with the energy of a child who felt completely secure in his place. In the world, I realized that I had achieved something more valuable than financial success. I had learned that true family isn't determined by genetics or tradition, but created through daily choices to see value and include the people who enrich our lives. I had discovered that healing family dysfunction requires courage to establish boundaries, wisdom to choose love over control and patience to allow transformation to unfold naturally. Most importantly, I had given Jake something I had never experienced in my own childhood, the unshakable knowledge that he is loved not for what he achieves or how he conforms, but simply for who he is. The calls that had poured in after that first Christmas celebration had evolved into ongoing relationships built on mutual support and genuine affection. What had begun as a response to exclusion had become a model for inclusion that was spreading throughout our community and beyond. As I tucked Jake into bed in his mountain bedroom, surrounded by photos of family gatherings and art projects created with people who chose to love him unconditionally, he asked me one final question. "Mom, do you think other families could learn to do what we do?" I think families who are willing to choose love over control and inclusion over exclusion can learn to create communities like ours, I replied. It starts with one person deciding to treat family relationships as opportunities for connection rather than obligations for conformity. Jake smiled sleepily. "I'm glad you decided to do that, Mom. This is the best family ever." Looking back on the year that had transformed our lives, I realized that exclusion had become the catalyst for creating the family we had always deserved. The pain of rejection had led to the joy of authentic connection. The isolation imposed by others had resulted in community built by choice. And in that beautiful mountain home surrounded by people who had chosen love over judgment and inclusion over exclusion, we had found something that money couldn't buy, but financial independence had made possible the freedom to create family relationships based on mutual respect, unconditional acceptance, and genuine love. The revenge against exclusion had been inclusion. The response to conditional love had been creating space for unconditional acceptance, and the result had been a family that was stronger, happier, and more loving than any of us had dared to imagine possible. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between accepting family dysfunction and creating healthier relationships? What would you do if you discovered you had the resources to build the family community you always wanted? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories about family transformation and chosen family building, and share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing that it's possible to create loving family relationships even when traditional structures have failed. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovery about what family really means, and I wish you the courage to choose love over control and inclusion over exclusion in your own relationships.